Hey, my name is Yuri, and I'm just making this video as a record for myself, but also for anyone else that might find it helpful or interesting, for my kids, perhaps even as they get older and want to learn about my journey and this part of it. Um, this is mostly about mental imagery, memory, aphantasia, imagination, and just my discoveries and practices and things that I've done and how it's like changed my life already and in a short amount of time. And so I guess I should start by saying that I am 40 years old and have lived most of my life without ever using any sort of mental imagery. And I do identify with having had aphantasia. And I still think I do have aphantasia, but I'm kind of like in between. And I think it's more about, for me, it's probably more of a never used it as a kid thing. And so it got pruned out. And um, maybe I never used it because it was so weak that it was not even discernible as something I could use. So maybe until I was 39, I used it a handful of times. Not that I saw anything, but I could think about things in a nonverbal way. Excuse me. That's another thing I'd like to talk to about is my art journey and how that's affected by this. Because I've always drawn. My family has been very artistic. My mom, her sisters, my sister, even my kids. It seems like we have some sort of, I don't know if it's a um, genetic thing, tendency, or if it's just something that has been cultivated and, just been in something that we passed along and enjoyed. Um, nature versus nurture, but that has always been a thing. And so I've always been able to, since I was a young kid, draw pretty well. And that's something else I want to talk about is how people that don't have a mind's eye or can't use mental imagery. And when I say imagery, I'm not just talking about visuals, I'm talking about the ability to imagine smells and to imagine sounds and touch and all the senses. But those artists who have not been able to use mental imagery, like why is that a thing and how do those relate to one another? But yeah, I have only recently started to really explore, to understand and learn about mental imagery, about aphantasia. Um, and I'll start by saying it was about 5 years ago when I lived in Iowa, in which I went on a walk with a coworker, and very, very smart coworker, deep imagination. I would imagine somewhere between above average or even hyper fantasia abilities, just based on what I know about him. I'll have to ask him after this and confirm it, but um, brilliant programmer, like talking about computer language programming, as far as I know. Um, but he was also, I think, an avid Reddit user, and I think it was there that he learned about Aphantasia. Maybe it was a news article, and it's this word and this concept in the scientific research community is relatively new and recent, though the idea and the awareness of it has been around for at least centuries. Excuse me. Um, so we went on a walk around Grays Lake in Des Moines, Iowa, and I think it was then that he was talking about how he had mentioned to Megan about Megan, um, our our friend, mutual friend, and coworker about aphantasia and how it was like, wow, there are some people who don't like they can't see anything in their, imagination in their mind's eye. And maybe that's not the words that he used, but that was the first time I'd ever heard of it. And it sort of was a seed that was planted, and I didn't think about it for a long time. However, due to like issues in my first marriage and other things, I started to notice through the years about my own issues with memory. And back then I wasn't as knowledgeable about memory and the different types of memory. So I just thought memory, but turns out it's episodic memory and autobiographical memory. And so, like, that was another thing that came up, and I became aware of that. Um, Fast forward some years, and I, left my first marriage. I left my old religion. I am a former Jehovah's Witness. I was raised that way, hated it, was atheistic in my teen years, and then like went full into it when I was 17 and like lived that way for about 18 years after that. And um, in the in December, in the winter of last year, there were some things that made me start pulling on the strings again. But even before that, in the summer of 2024, um, there, and I have more details of this recorded in like a voice memo I made for myself, but I came across a podcast on memory, and it touched on quite a few different things, but also on aphantasia. And then going back to what I was saying, in December 2024, um, I had some conversations, um, and I had I was living separately from my wife, my second marriage, and we'd often send voice messages, and something made me think about intellect and memory. And like I was like, I think again, frustrated with like, oh, why couldn't I remember these experiences as well? And like I wish I could remember better. And and I know during the summer we had talked more about earlier in the summer we had talked about like not being able to see things in memory. It's like when you're in a relationship with people and when you're working and living and doing all the things with people, you start to, realize, oh yeah, I don't remember that, or I do remember that, or what do you remember? And um, at any rate, in December 2024, I started thinking about it, and I started Googling and looking online and learning about memory techniques, um, and then that's when I first heard about image streaming and how it can improve cognition in general and can be good for different things. And but the thing is, when you have aphantasia, you can't do image streaming really, which is what I learned later, or it's very difficult. It's not it's not the same, How do you practice image streaming if you don't have a mental image? That's the problem. But I started learning about it, and I did a little bit of practice, just thinking about things. And what I started doing, without naming it back then, it was like sensory thought, thinking about things without using words to think about them. But I would, because I would name what I was thinking about. But there was this other concept of like the object, the environment, like thinking about those things without seeing a mental image. And I'm not seeing colors, I'm not seeing faces, but there is an emotional and a physiological aspect that's being engaged. So it is something that your body's like, oh, this is semi-real. I can think about certain types of food in a way that it will make me salivate, or, maybe it'll make me even feel a little hungry. Sorry, I'm a little still getting over some sort of winter uh, bug, so I may clear my throat and all those things. But um, so I started image streaming. I did it. I didn't do it continually, and but that's also the time where I had been dipping the toes in the Reddit world for several months, and so I started looking on Reddit and found out all sorts of things on the Aphantasia and the Cure Aphantasia group. Learned about the culture and cross culture involving those two worlds. Got myself banned unwittingly, like immediately, without warning, from the Aphantasia subreddit. There are some very strong opinions and feelings about this, as if it's some sort of disability and like needs to be accepted, and that you can't change yourself, or it can't be developed or built upon, or it can. And so there are some fierce opinions and feelings about that. Um, because some people have been living with it for 80 years and are just finding out about it. And it's like, what do you do at that point? And um, yeah, it's a whole disability versus ability versus neurodivergent, sort of thing. So it really has been, end of 2024, 2025, that since I've started like really digging into and understanding and learning about these things and practicing these things. Even back in December of last year, I was just listening to my recording um, from that time, that I was already having some what is called hypnagogic imagery, where as you are either falling asleep or coming out of sleep. I think in my instances, in my cases, it's usually had been back then, usually when I was coming out of sleep, but not fully awake, I would see an image, or of like it would be for a second, maybe a second and a half, very brief, but very vivid, as if I was looking at something. Like, I'm seeing the colors, I'm feeling it. It feels like I'm actually looking. My eyes are closed. I can physically feel that they're closed. I'm just waking up, but I'm seeing something as vivid as real life. That had never happened in my entire life before. And when I dreamt, I had dreams, but it was not, it was like my mental imagery is, in which there wasn't ever any colors. Like, I don't remember thinking about colors, or like that I saw the shape of something. It was just like listening to a podcast in which you know what's going on. Spatially, you might know what's happening, but it wasn't ever like this awareness, this mental or visual acuity of like, I saw this thing. And there are other things in regards to, just as a side note, there are other things in regards to aphantasia and um, how some people have developed a mind's eye or visuals related to psychedelics that I won't go into as far as my personal experience. But that is also something that I read about, that some people have developed visualization abilities while using plant medicine, such as psilocybin or ayahuasca or things like that. So, um, and there is scientific reports of this. So, um, I guess it goes without saying at this point that this is for people who have some knowledge of aphantasia and mental imagery. If you have no idea what it is, a lot of this might not make sense, but um, perhaps at another time I'll record like some more basic information. So as I learned more, thanks a lot to the Cure Aphantasia thread, I learned about like sensory thought, and like specific words were put to concepts that I had sort of known and felt, but like now it was like, okay, very concrete in regards to how to think differently, how to think using sensory, quote unquote, sensory thought, as opposed to verbal thought. So how to think about an apple and think about its color, how to think about its shape, how to think about how it feels, how to think about how it tastes. I'm not seeing it, but I'm like thinking about it, right? And um, the image doesn't get clearer as I think more about it in a visual sense. But I learned about sensory thought. I learned about verbal thought, and I would start asking people, anyone who I, could ask in, the right setting if it came up, like, what is it like for you if I tell you to close your eyes and think about this thing? Like, what is it like for you? And I'd get all sorts of responses and get all sorts of insight. And because for me, I'm always like, okay, let me try to learn as much as I can from people, from their experience to like try to understand this ability, this sense that I have no concept of, or I think I have no to little concept of. Excuse me. I know this is disgusting, but I probably won't go back and edit this out just because I have too much to do. And um, yeah. So the idea is that the more that you develop, the more that you utilize this different form of thought, that the more the neural pathways and the synapses, neuroplasticity, the more that they start to build like these new bridges. And eventually it'll be like just, it'll just turn on. Like and the scientific, studies have shown that like people with aphantasia have the ability to, it's almost like a computer where like the program is running and generating the images, but there's no monitor. It's just not being displayed. And there's a lot of thought and like scientific studies about how it's working and what's not working. Adam Zeman, the person who basically coined or got help coining the term aphantasia, has some really wonderful videos that came out at the beginning of this year about possible causes and all sorts of things. And just going back to me a little bit, one of the things that I've thought about this year is like, and learned last year um, through my mom, who I had, I was fortunate to get this information out because since I left that religion, I have like no contact. I'm not able to have contact with her. But when I was 3, I had a fever-induced, a febrile, not sure if I'm saying that right, febrile seizure, epileptic seizure. And I was put on phenobarbital for a full year, even though I just had one seizure due to a fever. Now, was it the seizure? Was the seizure an indication of overactivity in certain brain regions? Did it cause damage to my mind and shut down things that, made the signals too strong in certain areas or and too weak in other areas? Was it the long-term effect of the drug during a, crucial cognitive development period that muted, my mental imagery or just my brain in general to prevent seizures for a full year that cause anything? Perhaps. Was it me like being silly at a young age, I don't know, 5 or 6, and like showing that I could like fall down and hit my head against the ground on a wooden floor in someone's house? I have this memory of that for some reason, and like trying to say like, see, look what I can do. Like, was it that, or was it something more like just the fact that society um, is built around the verbal mind and speaking in words and in language, that I just focused so much on that and just neglected the physical and the sensory and the nonverbal mind. Um, who knows? Was it just genetic? Apparently, maybe not. I was able to find out from my older sister that she is not aphantasic, that she has, probably average, medium, like a 3 on the VVIQ or something like that, from 1 to 5, like somewhere in between, not hyperaphantasia, not aphantasia. So, um, but one of the key learnings is that for me, as I started developing and practicing using sensory thought, that I was finding that I could remember things that I had no idea were still stored, quote unquote, stored in my mind. Like I could remember objects from 30 years ago, from when I was a kid that I'd not thought about since having those objects. More objects currently than experiences like conversations or like times when I did things. Like I'm not seeing those experiences or hearing those voices in the conversations, but I am remembering like, oh yeah, I remember that pencil that my dad got us as like a little memento when he went on he must have went on a business trip and got this pencil from Georgia, the Georgia peach, and it had a little tassel. It was like a jumbo pencil. And it's like, oh wow, like I had totally forgot about that. Like how did like I remember that? I didn't even know I still had that. And so it's been like mind blowing that, oh, I have now this key to access memories and think about things in a way that I didn't think was possible, or I didn't even know, wasn't aware of. Now, with that has brought, even back in December of last year, a lot of longing and sadness for my family or for things. It's like Pandora's box, as they call it, where you gain this a bit, you're opening this thing, but there may be like a lot of good things, but there may be also like this really painful, hard to deal with things that come up. But learning the connection between mental imagery and memory, episodic memory. Um, and some people claim to have great episodic memory or autobiographical memory despite having aphantasia. So I understand that. But for me, like for many people, I understand that there's a link. I think the more modes that you can use to encode something, whether it's visual, oral, or tactile, the more like you're able to re-experience and like the deeper it's like stored in your mind and in your body. Um, Emotions are tied into that as well. But it was all connected to this, like, oh, why can I remember things? And like realizing that I had an really easy time letting go of things and letting go of people because once it was out of sight, then it was out of mind. And it's interestingly enough, like there isn't much like it's not so much an issue, like it's not an issue, it's not a big enough issue, like not being able to remember things from your past in a detailed way that it causes like I have muscle memory, I have semantic memory, I have the ability to remember numbers, remember languages and vocabulary. I taught myself Spanish and know a lot of Japanese, Amharic. When I was briefly in India, I learned, Hindi. And so like languages were not difficult because you just repeat it enough and you practice it and you use it and it gets stored, and that's not never been an issue for me. But the only time it was really kind of slightly a problem is dealing with those experience-based interview questions. Like, tell me about a time when you had an issue with a coworker and like how did you resolve it? And it's like, blank screen, blank screen, as it were, blank mind, nothing. It's like nothing. I don't know. And it's really about like trying to, for me, it's been like if I try to think about it just verbally, the words you're saying and like trying to reach in the store box in the storage container of verbal knowledge, it's like I don't know that. I don't have there's it's empty. But as I have been able to think about things using mental imagery and sensory thought, it's like, oh, I can remember quite a bit. And but yeah, it's like you realize that, or I began to realize that there's this whole nother way of thinking about things, a whole nother way of thought. And I began to understood why people have trouble letting go, why people have who have traumatic experiences, like how they get stuck in a loop of like just reliving it, rehearing that voice, being back in that situation and feeling the pain, and it's like very intense for them. And that's one benefit of aphantasia in that you don't relive those experiences and you there's not any type of intrusive spontaneous thought or imagery that comes up and will keep you up at night, you know. I think there's still for me is like what's stored in my body, you know. Like for example, after breaking up, a specific breakup in 2021, like my body felt like physiologically it had to like learn to let go because it was still attached to this person, even though it wasn't replaying like memories or thinking about her face or things like that. So it was stored, you know, that attachment was stored in the body and in the heart, if you will. Like there was that attachment that was there, but there wasn't like it was probably a lot easier than it would have been because I wasn't recalling willingly or spontaneously, involuntarily, I'd like to call it, though that line might be very thin. Sometimes you might think that it's spontaneous, and maybe it truly is, but sometimes thought happens and emotion happens so quickly. You know, that's how the mind works that you don't realize that you're doing it. I don't know. I'm sure the neuroscientists know about that, but people will call aphantasia the inability to voluntarily pull up, you know, to see images. But there's a lot of people that talk about spontaneous intrusive imagery. So something reminds you of something and you think about it. Is it because you didn't want to think about that thing and you're trying to stop thinking about that thing? Is it voluntary? I don't think so, but I don't know. So how it's going so far is that I'm finding that as I go to sleep and as I wake up, that there are brief moments in which it is much easier to actually see things, like actually have imagery coming to me where I can feel colors. It feels like I'm seeing the color, which that's a whole nother point in regards to are you really seeing it or are you just believing you're seeing it? I think that like some of my friends have reported, like I'm saying, like imagine the sound of a ball. Now, what do you see? And they're like, yeah, I see the ball, I see the shadow as it's bouncing up and down. And so it's like there are details that aren't involved that are more than just a belief of and a feeling, I think, that you're seeing it. And certain people talk about like, you know, people with hyperphantasia will talk about it being like a screen that they can just watch. So I'm finding that as I wake up or as I go to sleep, it is more, and these are like these hypnagogic images, I would say, that I can kind of like passively watch for a second or two, or these things that are being generated, and I'm not necessarily trying to think of it as I do when I'm, you know, awake and I'm thinking about a place or a person or a thing I did. Um, so I'm seeing a change in that. I haven't had like it was once every 2 to 3 months or so that I'd have a clear hypnagogic image, and that was at the end of last year till maybe the middle of this year. And it hasn't happened like it wasn't that startling and like whoa, like it was at the beginning, but I've had like little instances on that maybe on a more regular basis. Um, Maybe I will have to edit these out. I don't know. Um, so this is my journey for sure, trying to go from aphantasia, like never using the sensory thought, never seeing any images, never thinking about how something sounds like, or using playing with hearing voices or replaying songs in my mind, imagining the touch of someone and like really trying to do that. Like now I'm playing with those things and growing in that regard. And I think it's in my voice message I left, like it's actually helping with other areas of cognition. Like I can remember people's names from like 30 years ago. I'm like, how am I like pulling these up like without even hesitating? So it is helping in that regard. Um, I'm trying to use it in my work as I work in web development to like imagine concepts as a because it's very abstract type work where you're not, there's front end development, but especially in the back end development, like you're not really, it's very verbal, very logical and linear. So I've been trying to use that. Um, One of the things that I've also done for a while now, because of the episodic memory, the autobiographical memory, is to have like a journal. Um, Shout out to Mysterious Others, my amazing friend who has a shop in Astoria. That's her mysterious other creatures there. Um, but I've been writing in a journal um, to try to help myself like remember my life. My ultimate goal though is to not have to rely on a like daily journal. And so I've stopped, recording like I was recording like three major things each day. Now I'm like trying to just think of them every day in a sensory way. I kind of replay the experiences and then at the end of the week to go back and like write down what I'm doing. So like the journal is there. Again, it's just the life of somebody with SDAM, severely deficient autobiographical memory. And I'm not, there's a spectrum as there is in everything in life, but I don't think just based on reading other people's experiences that I'm like really, I have it that bad, but it's very an impoverished version of like, tell me about your life. There's not too much there that I can do with that. But that's the life of someone with aphantasia and SDAM. It's like it's hard to relive and tell those stories, even though like my heart's desire is to be a storyteller. So, and I have imagined characters and plots and things like that. So, moving away from talking directly about aphantasia, just on a little side quest, if you will, I want to talk a little bit about the artist in me because a couple of years ago I realized that, oh, I want to pursue art and I want to like actually study and learn art to make so I can make my own graphic novels, so I can be this storyteller. And even when back when I was a teenager, I was, creating characters and stories and like trying to make comics. I have oh, even artifacts of the past of like old comic ideas and characters. And um, I'm so glad that I still have these things, but it has been a passion. Like I love manga, I love anime, I love Pixar, I love the storytelling that happens, these deep emotional stories and characters. And um, at any rate, just like dance, which is something that I realized, like, oh wow, this really makes me very happy. Like I need more dance in my life, and that was in 2022. It was the realization that, oh, like this is a big part of me, and I really enjoy it. And I've never really studied it or been serious about it, learning how to improve or like just really fully immersing myself in it. So when I was laid off from a job, a web job at the end of 2023, I figured, okay, I'm going to pursue art. Some And I didn't end up doing that because in early 2024, I this job fell in my lap, and due to other life circumstances, it seemed like, oh, this door has opened. I should walk through it, career-wise and otherwise. I was I was taking classes, like a watercoloring class. I was drawing at like every day and doing other things, but then shortly after that, like other things took me away from it. But fast forward to today, and I started digging into this book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Dr. Betty Edwards, which is a book that was, I believe, first released in like 1978 or 79. And then there's been revisions of it like every decade or so. There's like the fourth edition, which I have somewhere here. Um, I want to see if I have it to, oh, here it is. This book right here. This is not the newest This is not the newest version of it, but this is um, one of the newer versions of it. But drawing on the right side of the brain. And because I had first discovered this book like years ago when I was in Iowa, like over a decade ago, we were renting a house and somebody had it on their, they were gone for like a year and we were renting their house and they had it on their bookshelf. And I know that semantically. I know that like I'm not picturing it in my mind, though I can like remember very vaguely like that house. But when I saw like I was surprised that people were able to like improve their drawing abilities within like a week and go from kindergarten level to like they had been drawing their whole life. And so as I was, planning to educate myself and learn, how to like really draw, I thought this course would like help me improve. And just within the last month or two, it blew my mind with this concept at the beginning of how we live in a world and society right now that has on a educational level in schools has really been geared towards the left, quote unquote, left side of the brain, the left mind, like where a lot of, for a majority of us, a lot of our language quote unquote, processing. We like to use computer terms when we're talking about the mind, but where a lot of that takes place. And you could read the beginning of this book where it talks about verbal, ways of thinking and seeing versus like the using the right mind. And it is so analogous to aphantasia and mental imagery that it's like you could, fill in the words um, and replace one with the other. Um, but it had me realizing that I could use art and drawing as a way to work on my aphantasia, to develop mental imagery by changing the way I saw things, the way I looked at things. And I had already done a little bit of this, like realizing that to myself. I don't know how in the moment I can't necessarily recall how it occurred to me, but I realized that I have eyes, but it's like I haven't ever really looked at something before. It's almost like someone who's eaten their food their whole life and just like they never slowed down to like actually really taste it and savor it. They just like chewed it, got down and like ran so they could go play outside or play their video games, and they never actually tasted food, like really experienced it and sensed it. And I realized that that's kind of like how visually I had gotten. And, that's due to social media, video games, like it's, and just the way that I process things, for me, it was just like, oh, accomplish this goal, accomplish this goal. I use my sight so that I can move around and not bump into things. I use it so that I can read, but I'm not really just sitting without verbal thought, just looking at something. I've never really done that. And that's what this course, this book, like, is helping me to do. It's like it's a real practice in patience and just staring at something for a long time without like turning off the speaking mind, turning off the verbal mind by presenting it with a task that it just is like, I can't do this. It's too much for me, or I'm not interested. This is boring. You enter a meditative state by using another part of your mind. And this book goes well into like the difference between the verbal mind and the visual artist's mind. But basically, you are em employing something that has the ability to not just like linear 1 + 1 = 2, in a programmatic way, language-based way approach, but can look at the whole, the gestalt, um, that has the ability to, it has different abilities. They talk to each other. Of course, you use them in tandem to do most tasks, but one side, there is there that Roger Sperry's research is still holds true to today in regards to like the specialization and how they work together. It's not absolute, obviously, for everyone. It can be different, but there are like the majority of people, they find using brain scans like these are the areas of the brain that are active when you do these tasks, more active than perhaps the other. There are things called the split brain studies that happened back then too that you can look into. But this drawing on the right side of the brain is a recent discovery because I had this book, finally started reading it. I had read it, started reading it at the beginning of 2024, got this job, another web development job that fell in my lap and was like, whoa. And then eventually, I fell away from like actually start. I bought all the supplies that you need, like the viewfinder and different things. I made them, got them, whatever. They're not expensive, they're easy to get, but you know, but now just getting back to it for the first time, um, it's like perhaps one of the most incredible tools, I think, for people if they want to learn a new way of like to activate and really exercise this other mode of thinking. Um, as an artist growing up, and even as an adult, I was always there was only one specific time in my life in which I was very patient and spent a long time on a specific piece of work. Otherwise, it was like quick sketches, even with like caricatures, which I've drawn and first learned back in 2009 and would do every, now and then. I learned it, did it for 2 months in like 2009 as a side job. And yeah, it was just like, even if I posted something on Instagram or on my website, it would just be like, oh, maybe it took me 20 minutes or an hour. But the mindset was like, oh, I'm creating this thing, at least in recent times. Maybe when I was a kid, it was different. But the mindset was, let me create this thing and like, oh, I can't wait till I'm done so I can show it off, or I could post it or like, so it can be done. And there wasn't any ever like deep satisfaction or pleasure derived from like just creating the thing itself, the process. And that's one thing that the book brings up is this idea the Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain book brings up is this idea that, and this is a quote from somebody somewhere, I don't remember, I could look it up, but that art is not about the end product. Creating art isn't about the end product, the painting or the sculpture, but it's about the state that you can enter while creating it. And obviously, for me, I know that there is huge value in what the end product is and like giving it to someone or creating a story and being able to like watch it and share it and all these things and share your experience, which prior to recently, like I'd always done art as a function, not as an expression of myself, more like commercial art. As a, let's create this product, not as, oh, I enjoy this and I want to share like what's in my heart. It was like just this thing to do to create something that looks cool to show off as a kid, or because it's fun, or it's back then felt like, oh, cool, I can make this thing and it looks good. Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, one of the quotes it talks about, as I mentioned, is like being able to enter this meditative state, this almost like what you might call the flow state or trance state, in which you turn off the speaking mind and you are just slowly, carefully, patiently, very intently focusing on what you're looking at and trying to replicate that, you know, on paper or, in this case, learning how to draw. And that has been it's been amazing to do that, just to like, I'm going to draw, I'm going to intentionally go as slow as I can and just, I'm not thinking about time. I'm not thinking about how long this is going to take me. And that has been great for my art because one of the things I notice is that I'm already really good at drawing. But I think one of the things that separates me from those who are like really, really good and like that I admire is that they just put more time into a specific drawing, like, and are more slow about what they're doing, more reflective about what they're doing. And so I've been looking at my art that I've created going super slow, and I'm like, wow, this is like 2 to 3 times better than things that I've been drawing. Like it almost seems like it's done by a different artist. And so that has been a huge thing that, like, wow, if I just actually enjoy the process, which has been enjoyable, it is enjoyable to enter a calm state um, through that. But if I do that, not only do I get to enjoy it more, but it's calming and all those things, but it also makes my art much, the quality improves. And that makes sense, right? Like if you rush a job, the quality usually will suffer, you know. Um, so I'm using art to I'm trying to a lot of different things to utilize areas of my mind, of my brain that have been dormant, that, haven't been used much, using sensory thought, turning off my verbal mind, and, you know, going into the sensory, going into the, challenging it by like it's having to do this really hard task that it's not used to doing. And it's the part of my mind, with the visual side of my mind, the sensory side of mine that doesn't get utilized nearly as much. I work in a job that doesn't use it at all or hardly really, on the relative scale. I'm not like working with bricks and holding them in my hand and putting them in place and like looking at something, or, I'm looking at screens, which and going back and forth quickly and all that sort of thing. Um, so some of the other things that I've been doing is, just recently, is drawing with my left hand, challenging it, trying to again just get as much energy, quote unquote energy, flowing, on the other hemisphere as possible, but also like challenging my trying to create new neural pathways, like trying to stretch that and use that neuroplasticity. Brushing my teeth with my left hand, um, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. Still at the early stages of that. But I have noticed things changing in regards to my patients, like with my kids who are relatively young. They're like preteen, like early adolescence. And I've noticed that my ability to be more patient with them is increasing. Things that would have like had me in frustration and made me lose my cool is I'm like noticing beforehand, like, oh, like I'm starting to feel this in my body. This is, and also this is something that could make me irritated if as they keep doing this thing. How do I handle this so we don't reach that point? Whereas before it would just be like, ah, you know. So that brings up another topic, which is this idea that I heard of recently that mental imagery, which I'm using again that word imagery to describe all sorts of visualization, quote unquote visualization, smells, imagining colors and shapes and feelings and things, but that it is tied not only to the brain or the mind, but there is a full body connection in how we store memory and experiences and experience those things, that there's a physiological component, and that the more like the autonomic nervous system and like how that relates to interoception, like being aware of those things, which for me, I've also had a very sensitive, I'm very sensitive in many ways, but one of them is like I've learned in certain instances, my autonomic nervous system is just like skyrockets when it shouldn't. Like, what's going on? I've never been attacked by a dog. Like, I've had some pretty intense situations growing up, but nothing like that I would say was like really extreme, but maybe for me it felt that I don't know, my body feels differently. So I'm learning how to, and I've been practicing that in relationship. Like, okay, I'm feeling in the moments of conflict, like my body's like, oh, I'm feeling my heart, like I'm just like shaking, and so just becoming more, I've been practicing on like, okay, breathing through that, like trying to like noticing and just like taking a moment and breathing and not just speaking to avoid, argument, um, like not, bad argument. Um, so there's this new research that was released that there's maybe some correlation between interoception, like our ability to notice what's going on in our body, these autonomic and automatic processes to aphantasia. There's some relatively significant findings about that. So I practice some of the things I practice is like not only do I practice like really looking at things, and not only do I practice like closing my eyes and trying to picture what I just saw, but I'm also practicing interoception more often, like feeling, okay, like how do I feel overall? Like, do I feel any pain in my body? Do I feel any discomfort? What's my posture like? How am I feeling my posture to be? Like, do I notice my heart beat? Can I feel it, like the vibration in my chest or my neck? Um, I'm practicing art in a new way and trying to, like, after I have an experience, try to recall that experience in a visual way. And, using mental imagery, maybe try to like re-smell or retaste the food that I had at my friend's house last night, or like just really noticing someone's smile or just like what they're wearing while they're talking to me. Things that I just never did in the past. And so that's brings me to where I am today. just on this path. I feel like I'm getting close to the hypophantasia field or stage in which I have what might be called proto visuals at nighttime, and like before I'm going to bed. It's like, yeah, I'm seeing colors and I'm feeling them, and it's like and other stuff that's moving and I'm not controlling. I'm just like watching this screen that's happening. That's happening more and more often. I've had like some flashes of light like coming to me visually recently, and like new stuff is happening in recent times in regards to like, especially in that like liminal space in between like fully asleep and fully awake. Like there's stuff that happens. The mind, starts to quiet certain areas and shut off certain things, and like these signals for visuals are like coming through. This is not while using any sort of like mind altering substances or anything. It's just like um, just normal. However, as a little side note, and I realize that this like log is like going all over the place, but I did a 4-day fast for the first time, and that seemed to also, like when I would go to sleep, I'd have some pretty strong, like that seemed to break things open, which fasting, autophagy, um, which can sometimes relate to brain cells, neurons, which, neurogenesis, these are all things that I've looked into. So, avoiding Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia through things like cardio work, regular exercise, like these are all things that I've looked into. And I would encourage anyone who's like serious about developing and stretching their mind to like learn new abilities is to like through diet, exercise, sleep, like you can't, that's all part of it. Um, and mental health, because like stress and depression and anxiety can, you know, is one of the reasons that people develop aphantasia, and like their mental imagery goes away or diminishes, which I will say is something that I've heard from people who can visualize, is that they have seen in their own lives that certain times in which they have certain practices, whether it's meditative practices or what have you, that their imagery has gotten more intense or grown less intense or less vivid, and that there are meditative practices that have been around for, I think thousands of years in, different areas of the world in which, you know, it was something that it was a skill and ability that people strengthened. So I am someone who believes that you can develop or strengthen this skill, even if it's from like close to nothing and maybe even nothing. I think it's like someone who's born blind and has never seen anything in their life visually, physically. Like, how do you express to them what it is like to see? How do you express that to them? It's like in words. That's the challenge for people who have aphantasia, to learn or try something that they've never done before. As a brief example of that, I one of the things that I taught myself when I was a kid was how to move my ears like this. I don't know if you can see them wiggling. I had never wiggled my ears before. I'd never experienced what it would feel like, but it's the muscles in the head like pulling on the ear. It's really the head there, and you could see it. But like, how do you express to someone, hey, you can move your ears? I never knew how to do that, but I taught myself, and I started by moving my jaw in a kind of like pseudo way to like move my ears, and I think that helps like some of the muscles, like like me feel some of the muscles. I don't know how it worked, but that is another example of like, oh, people who've never experienced something, who never had this ability. You would say to someone like, move your ears. They'd be like, I can't do it. It's like, or draw. And they may be like, I can't do it. I can't draw. I just suck at it. I can't. Or how do you draw so well? I just do it. Like people, just because of the fact that you've never done it before, you don't know how to do it, you don't know where to start from, does not mean that you can't ever do it. But it is supremely challenging to try to attempt something that you've never seen before, you've never experienced before, And not only that, but no one can show you what it looks like. It's something that happened that's completely invisible. So it is like this hidden, secret, magical ability, if you will, that we as humans have. So hard to learn, so hard to attempt because it's so hidden and we don't ever talk about it. And in modern society, it is like it's overridden by so many things, the fast pace of life, verbal, books, math, reading, writing, arithmetic. Those are what make money. Those are what things are important oftentimes. Ah. And so that's the journey that I'm on and it's changed my life. For the very first time, even though I've been thinking about it since 2020, when I left my old religion and got divorced, like I have found a mental health counselor because as I am opening up these new portals to my past and to the future and being able to re-experience people and remember my parents and other things, it brings up like real sorrow and grief and longing and nostalgia that I'd never had to deal with before. And it's like, this is pretty intense right now. And if it keeps like getting more intense, I have a feeling I'm gonna need some help. And opening up these emotions and talking to someone about these things may also be one of the things that helps me further develop. And there may be an emotional breakthrough that opens up more of this ability in regards to mental imagery. So that was a lot. It was unorganized, it was spontaneous, improvised tale of where I'm at right now. Even if no one ever watches this, I know it'll be helpful to me. But hopefully, I'll be making other videos on specific ways to practice that I have found helpful. There's a lot out there now. There's websites and videos and things like that. And I hope there continue to be more of them because I feel like with some of the habits that we're forming in modern society, that there'll be more people that don't know how to visualize and that can't visualize, more people with aphantasia. Because we are spending so much time consuming media and like listening to this a language and being in language mode, but listening without speaking. We're not generating imagery. We're not imagining. We're looking at screens and having the images just in front of us all the time. And so like that muscle is like being atrophied severely. I feel like there'll be more and more need for people. And maybe, I don't know, maybe the this gift in the movie The Sphere, which is one of my favorite scientific movies, sci-fi movies, they talk about like this imagination being like man's greatest ability and it's based on a book, but and there are in other areas, other stories, it's like this ability to imagine is like our most powerful ability. And it is what separates us as a species. And I feel like that's true. It's like the book, The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. It's like we everything is made twice or something like that. It's like it's made mentally in our image, you know, in our mind. We imagine it, and then we create it. Everything is created twice. But if we lose the ability to create in our mind and to imagine, if it becomes dampened in a large part of humans over time, then, and this is just complete theory, but based on just speculation, but it would almost be like to me like we are devolving, if you even believe in evolution. That because I did not used to, that's for sure. But that we are regressing as a species. I feel like. language, spoken language and word, and thinking like the quote unquote dominant mind and the quote unquote lesser mind, these two major modes of thought are most powerful when they work together in tandem, and there has to be balance. And if we lose the ability to replay and to imagine, we lose the ability to remember and to be creative. And um, that's how I see it, however controversial that take may be for some. So it's my endeavor to keep trying to develop a balance between the two and to become strong in both. Or I feel like I'm pretty strong on the one side in regards to language, but to be healthy and strong on both sides. So that's what I'm doing. I better end this here because this is turning out to be really long. But yeah, I hope someone benefits from this. If you have questions, feel free to send them to me in comments below, and maybe I'll add my contact information. I'm sure you can reach me. Um, so much more I could say about this. Eventually, I'm sure I'll be moved to post more videos and write a book or something, who knows? But I really do feel like this thing can change people's lives. It's already started to change my life. So um, I'll be intense about it. I'll be obsessed with it, if you will. And um, because it has been life changing for me. So, all right. Until next time.